Układ Sił for this interview. My name is Zuzanna Nowak, and this time I have the tremendous pleasure to host Mr. Panda, head of the Stockholm Centre for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you.
Let's go straight to the point. It's been a month since the end of the G20, or rather, let's say, G21 meeting, which was chaired by India. It was considered as a diplomatic success for India, but while the summit confirmed the growing role of developing countries in international politics, do you think that it was really a success, or maybe just a skillful demonstration of intentions which will fail because of the group's internal divisions?
Well, I would say that it was a success for three reasons. One, I think if we go back to India's diplomatic history, we don't really recently see India hosting such grand events quite often. So in that context, the way India hosted the G20 summit, given its economy, given its geographic complexity, given its lack of infrastructural facilities, I think the way India hosted it, that's too also in a capital city like Delhi, which is a very congested and highly dense populated region, that was outstanding. So I would call it a success. Second, I think more than anything else, the way India actually drafted, successfully built that consensus to draft the G20 joint communique, that was really explains the successful diplomatic endeavor that India accorded to the G20 summit. I mean, let's accept it, that we are navigating through a lot of delicate issues, not only between the Ukraine and Russia, but also between China and India, between superpower rivalry, between Indo-Pacific and the Eurasian powers. So keeping all of these complexities in mind, the release of the joint communique and building a consensus in favor of that is an outstanding achievement for India. And I think the third point is that I think the way I looked at the G20 is that probably this G20 explained a narrative that G20-like summits are not always all about major powers. It's not all about US and China. It's not all about the developed economies. G20 is about the non-major economies, non-major powers. The welcoming of the African countries, African Union to the G20 summit was a huge development in the context of G20 history, as well as in the context of the wider North-South politics. And I think in that context, it was a huge success. But I think where I would be actually critical to the G20 summit is that I think for a long time, India has been well connected with Russia and China in the trilateral forum of Russia, India, China foreign minister level dialogue. In fact, for last 2 decades, there has been a trilateral forums which has actually paved the way for Shanghai Cooperation Organization cooperations, BRICS formulations, the creation of the new development bank under the BRICS, the establishment of Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So in all of these, India's connections with Russia as well as China in the multilateral forums has been one of those backbone. But today, what we saw that even though India was hosting the G20 summit, and India is well connected with Russia and China in different multilateral forums, but India did not really succeed in terms of bringing the Russian President Putin as well as the Chinese President Xi Jinping to India. There could be different reasons. There could be different reasons why they did not come. Xi Jinping not coming, there are many logics which are in the public forums. One is that the Chinese economy is not well. Second is that Xi Jinping does not really want to see an anti-China forum with the lead of India in the G20. Also, it is said that maybe this, Xi Jinping wanted to avoid a forum which will be more in favor of Prime Minister Modi. But while saying that, I think it is also explains to the divide that India is having with China, increasing divide. And that's not really a good thing for the future of the G20 or future of all those multilateral forums under which India is connected with China. Similarly, if we look at President Putin, of course, President Putin has been declared as a criminal by many Western media and a court of law. But I think for India, the way India has actually maintained a strong and steady relations with Russia, that actually explains to the fact that probably there was an expectation that Putin will be visiting India. But the very fact that Putin decided not to visit India for the G20 summit, it explained that probably there is a lack of confidence between Russia and India on many issues. So keeping all of these things, I would say that G20 was a success. Probably it falls short in becoming a huge success. These are the critical points which points to the fact that it fell short in becoming a huge success. But the way India's diplomatic maneuver actually acted in the background channel to make it happen in a delicate situation, in a delicate global politics. And I think a lot of credits to India, and it was definitely a success.
Thank you. Going a little bit deeper maybe into this India-China relationship, you recently contributed a great report on China's military decision-making in times of crisis and conflict. That was the proper title. You argued there that China, let's say, suspects that New Delhi's foreign policy choices vis-a-vis China are influenced by the United States. And it creates a kind of a triangle of mistrust. Are those suspicions justified? Because it seems so if you take into account the so-called India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. But what's your take on that?
Well, I think the China-India boundary dispute and China-India relations is a much complicated episode. What we need to understand is that this is not an episode of a recent past. This is an age-old conflict pertaining to the boundary dispute. But while saying that, I would request all of your viewers and subscribers who are actually leading Układ Sił to read the report where I have a chapter on China's decision-making and the boundary dispute with India, which is released by the National Bureau of Asian Research in the United States, in the Seattle, Washington. This is a key study which has come on the China's decision-making, particularly on the China's military decision-making, which factors into different crises and conflicts into account. So there I have a chapter, and I would request all of your subscribers, those who are interested to read, they could download that report and read in order to understand better. But I think one of the most important aspects of China's military decision-making is that there was a period during the previous Chinese president, Hu Jintao, when the Chinese military decision-making was very much collective in nature. But today it is becoming much more unitary, much more authoritarian, and much more Xi Jinping-centric. So therefore, any decision that has been taken on the boundary dispute with regard to India has a strong say from the top, that is from the president of China, Xi Jinping, or the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, that is Xi Jinping. So while saying that, what we saw is that for last 5 to 7 years, or let's say 8 to 10 years, I think the decision-making process within China is becoming much, much more singular, unified, and much more authoritarian in nature. And that cannot be really discounted. Keeping that aspect in mind, we saw that in 2016, China underwent a huge military reforms where it condensed some of the military commands. It also had a Tibetan plateau, which is now especially looking at India. So all of this all of these reforms has a clear linkages with the decision-making process towards India. Given the fact that China's boundary dispute with India is nothing new, it's an age-old conflict. There are many complexities are attached to it. Through this, decision-making process, what today we kind of see is that a non-negotiable, very rigid, and authoritarian practice of China towards India. China does not really look India in the same way. China is not open to negotiations. China is not flexible about boundary dispute to negotiations. So today we see that the Chinese approach has been quite rigid and quite strong, which is really very authoritarian in terms of challenging the India's border planning and infrastructural development. Also, what has been noticed is that the way actually China is changing the status quo in the boundary region, that is also something very astounding. We know for a fact that China is changing the status quo in many regions, from South China Sea to India-China boundary to many other regions, be it in the maritime sectors or in the land territorial sector. But the problem with India is becoming much, much more complicated and dense. And that is something what India needs to be worried about, because the kind of decision makers we are seeing in the China's military and political practices, they are just nothing. They just follow the order from the top that let's not really renegotiate or negotiate with India. Let's have a firm and strong position vis-a-vis India, and we will not allow India anything to dominate or anything to carry forward. So today we see a much more authoritarian practices of China, a much more stronger voice from China, which is very much non-negotiable.
Quite often I can even hear the voices that China is like new Russia for the West. But India in international relations seem to be very assertive, pragmatic, and also it is big enough to act as it wants. It is also a totally different one from China, but a tough nut to crack for the EU and the US. Should the West be somehow afraid of India's competition in global leadership? Or how to rather reframe our thinking in the West about India, so to better understand this country and to better cooperate, forgetting about this competition for leadership?
Well, I think I would not really draw the parallel between China and India, but I would definitely agree with your point to the fact that China is becoming like Russia in many ways. The decision-making process in China is very much similar to what we have in Russia under President Putin. But while saying that, we cannot really compare the apple with oranges, because India's institutions, decision-making process, political echelon is based on democratic principles. We have a strong federal system. There are so many opposition parties in India. So the decision-making process in India is very, very much methodological, very much federal in nature, and very much democratic in practice. There are democratic institutions which could oppose and could put a curve or a restriction on India's decision-making process. So therefore, it is really not right to say that India will be a country similar in the world scale, what we are seeing in the context of China today. But in the context of India, I think why we are seeing today a very strong voice from India or a vocal India is that India is the #1 populous country in the world today. It has a large population. It has its own domestic, constituency to take care of. The food, the requirements of food, the requirements of oil and energy, gas. These are the day-to-day demands and requisites for a successful run of the Indian economy. And I think unless we really have a guarantee and a sustainability in our foreign relations practice on these issues, we cannot really push India to the next level. So therefore, what today we are seeing is a much more vocal India on some of these issues. More importantly, what we also see today is that how India is becoming much, much more vocal and very strong when it comes to national security issues. And I think that is one thing which most of the countries in the world today are unwilling to compromise. So India is very much included in that practice. I think under the current government in Delhi, there is a huge focus on national security issues, and India is not willing to compromise anything when it comes to the national security practices or the national security issues. So therefore, what we are today seeing a kind of strong voice from India coming to preserve its territorial integrity and national sovereignty, which India faces a strong threat from China, a strong threat from Russia, a strong threat from Pakistan. So therefore, India is very, very vocal about its national security issues. So therefore, what we are today seeing a vocal and strong India internationally is just a natural development, keeping India's domestic interest in perspective.
Thank you. So you mentioned internal, very well-defined internal national security interests. Can you elaborate maybe on some other key internal factors that have contributed to India's evolving role as a prominent player in international diplomacy? Is it economy or national leaders' charisma or demographic potential? Or
I think it's a mixture of everything. India is a versatile country. India is a country of many diversity. So we need a strong leadership, which we are currently having in Delhi, and having a strong leadership in Delhi always helps because to manage such a complex community in India, which is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilinguistic country, society. It's going to be a challenge. So to have a strong leadership in Delhi does help to have a much more decisive future of the country. The second, I think, is the populations, which is our strength. Within that population, what we are seeing in India at present is a very energetic and futuristic youth population. Youth population which is bright, which is knowledgeable, which is IT savvy, and which is quite futuristic. So I think that's one of the key criteria of success for India. More than that, I think what we also see today is that a comprehensive developmental plan all across India, no matter is the central government or the state government, every government are becoming much more accountable to the people than earlier. So today we see a comprehensive level of development undergoing throughout India, which is a positive development for India's success story. So therefore, we could see that if we are talking about rising India and India becoming one of the next power to look at, then it has to be a combination of everything.
Thank you for your extremely valuable arguments and your time, and also reading recommendations. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Follow us on social media for further analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to talk to you.